have somebody who I consider a real political hero. He's a brave man living in Asheville, North Carolina. And having lived in South Carolina, I know the reality of living in this Bible Belt mentality. And he's spoken truth to many powerful Republican fundamentalist monsters. And he actually is a city councilman, which is an achievement in itself as an outed atheist. So he's been fighting the good fight. Unfortunately, didn't win the congressional race that he recently ran, but he'll tell you all about that, I'm sure. Anyways, Cecil Bothwell is a man who's a true activist, and with his ability to articulate important issues and outing sheriffs who are taking advantage of their power, he is a journalist of extreme abilities and courage, and I'm very honored to introduce Cecil Bothwell.
Thank you so much. Brothers and sisters and brothers, I'm here to tell you that I was saved by Billy Graham. It's the reason I'm standing in front of you today. Well, I'm putting you on some, and I'm sure that that message would be a surprise to this group. But it is true that Billy Graham has a great deal to do with the reason I'm standing in front of you today. A great deal to do with my political career, and I'll be telling you more about that as I go along here. I know that comes as something of a shock, but I live about 5 blocks from Billy Graham Freeway. I live 15 miles from Billy Graham. I live 6 miles from the Billy Graham Conference Center at the Cove. He's a local hero in Asheville. His headquarters for the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association was there until his son took over the ministry. I was an investigative reporter and editor. I was managing editor of our local weekly in Asheville, the Mountain Express, and when I realized that I didn't like managing, I kicked myself upstairs and became the lead reporter. And I did a lot of normal reporting, city reporting, but in my spare time I did a lot of investigation. And the big investigation I worked on over a 5-year period was of our sheriff, who was extremely corrupt. Everybody knew he was corrupt. Nobody would do anything about it. And I was the only reporter who was paying any attention. And that's what got me in deep water, with hot water, with political opponents a little later on. In the meantime, while that was going on, my regular work for the newspaper, in March of 2002, one of the infamous Nixon White House tapes was released, which was a conversation between Richard Nixon and Billy Graham in the Oval Office. The story I read in the daily paper was about 2 paragraphs from the Associated Press. And those 2 paragraphs indicated that they'd been trashing the Jews and talking about the negative effect of Jews in America. Well, Billy Graham immediately apologized. He said he didn't remember saying it, as if that was sufficient, and that he certainly didn't believe that. And he apologized to the National Association of Rabbis, and everything settled down. Well, I'd been a reporter for a while, and I knew the 2 paragraphs from the Associated Press, from the wire service, carried in my local paper, especially a local paper that was very friendly to Billy Graham. He's on that paper all the time. I knew there was more of a story there. So I got hold of the tape, a copy of the tape. I got a transcript from the National Archives, both of which were heavily redacted. It's amazing how much stuff there were black lines through, so I have no idea what else they were talking about. But it turned out that Graham was leading the conversation, through much of the conversation. He was the one saying it was the satanic Jews who were producing pornography in America. It was the satanic Jews who were running America into the ground. And most ominously, toward the end of the conversation, he said to Richard Nixon, "Maybe we can do something about this after you're reelected." Doing something about the Jews is not a very pretty picture of this world. It has a very, very sad and tragic history. That really caught my attention. So I decided maybe we haven't been told what Billy Graham's been telling presidents all these years. We keep hearing prayer breakfast. We keep hearing spiritual advice. So I started digging. I had 3 interns working with me. I got them to work through the periodical literature, the guide to periodical literature, and find past articles. I read every presidential biography or autobiography that had mention in the index of Billy Graham. I read many of Billy Graham's books. I hired a researcher in Washington to work in the National Archives, which is where the Nixon archives were housed until they later moved to the Nixon Library. I had one of my interns go through all the indexes at Wheaton College, where they store the archives of the Billy Graham evangelistic organization. In fact, many of those archives are going to be sequestered for 25 years after he dies. So there may be a treasure trove for researchers later on. The picture that emerged during all this research, I spent 5 years on the project, was not one of spiritual advice, although there was that too. The thing that shocked and amazed me was that from Harry Truman forward, Billy Graham advocated for war. He urged Harry Truman to invade Korea long before we were being drawn into it, telling Truman that there were more Christians per capita in Korea than anywhere in the world, which was not then true, is not now true, and has never been true. He tried to get Eisenhower into Indochina. He may have given him advice about Diem, who was a Catholic. He was very involved in the Vietnam War and gave some advice to Kennedy, although he was on the outs. Graham organized the anti-Catholic movement against Kennedy during the Kennedy-Nixon thing. He was in Switzerland pulling the strings to foment anti-Catholicism in the United States, which he later advised Nixon to steer away from. These are more details you could read in the book that I wrote about that. But he advocated for war over and over and over again, which hence the title of my book about it, The Prince of War. Both a play on the Prince of Peace, Jesus, the Prince of Peace, but also that was the advice that he was giving our presidents over and over and over. He believed that American armies would Christianize the world. And his final act in that play was when he stood beside George W. Bush when George W. Bush declared war in the National Cathedral after 9/11. So he has given his imprimis to all of our wars in the late 20th century. Well, that was the theme of the book. Okay, now turn a little corner in the story, because this all feeds into my theme today, which is about being a politician and being an atheist. I was pretty successful as an editor and writer for that newspaper. Like many weeklies, they do annual reader polls, where they want you to vote for the best Italian restaurant and the best bar and the best show and all those sort of things. And at least in our paper, there was this category for the best reporters, the best print reporter, the best TV reporter, the best radio, that sort of thing. For 2 years in a row, I had won that award for the best print reporter. And 3 times total over the last 6 years, I have won that. So I mean, people regarded me as a pretty good reporter, at least the people who bothered to vote. When that second time came out, it was on October 10th of 2007. That was 2 weeks before the Billy Graham book came out. 2 days after I got that 3rd award as the best print reporter, I was called into the publisher's office and fired. North Carolina is one of those states where you never have to be told why you were fired. So I don't know. They never gave me a reason. But I suspect it had to do with advertiser pressure or pressure from the Billy Graham organization on the newspaper. One big grocery chain in particular is close to the Billy Graham organization, and it's an important full-page color ad every week. I don't know, but 2 weeks later the book came out. That was the first really good step in my political career. Being that, the reaction of people in Asheville was enormous. They had to run 4 pages of letters, angry letters about my being fired. The blogs blew up over it. Local blogs blew up over it. People were really upset that they fired me because I had a pretty good record. I was even then bringing down the sheriff, this crummy criminal sheriff, and had outed other things. I was doing investigative reporting. So that got me a lot of attention, a lot more attention than a byline usually gets you. You know, people, you read newspapers or magazines all the time, and that frequently you don't really pay attention to who wrote it, unless it's an opinion column in the newspaper. But, you know, you just, a reporter wrote a story. But that got my name a lot of attention right then. Okay, about 3 months later, it was in the middle of winter, I was thinking, wow, there's a county commission primary coming up. And I knew a lot of times, sitting there covering meetings, I was thinking, these idiots. I could do better. And I thought, well, why don't I try? Maybe I could do better. I mean, I think I could, but put the money on the line. So I jumped into the county commission race, and it was late to be getting in. It was only 2 months up until the primary, I guess, by the time I really decided to do it. And I lost in that primary by 0.8% to a 20-year incumbent who's enormously popular. He's still on the county commission. So I thought I did pretty well, but on the other hand, I hated it. I hated most of all having to ask people for money, because I didn't have any money to put into my campaign, so it wasn't like I was actually pantying up for myself. And I raised about, I don't know, $8,000. I just didn't feel comfortable with that piece. And I thought, well, I've given it a try, forget politics. And I went back to trying to earn a living. And then in the middle of summer, this really wonky friend of mine went over the poll results. And he said, you know, Cecil, those 16,000, almost 17,000 votes you got, over 12,000 were in the city, and the rest were out in the hinterlands out there. You won like mad in the city. You should run for city council. And then, I'm not gonna do that. Well, that worked on my head. So 6 months later, in January of 2009, I decided to run for city council. It was going to be an October primary. This time I got a real organization together, really cranked up. We ended up with over 500 volunteers and the longest list of donors that had ever been turned in the city in any election. It had a lot of $5 donors. I really worked for that grassroots kind of support. It was a 10-person primary for 3 seats. We had an open primary system there. There were 3 open seats. I came in first of the 10. Everything worked really well. Well, that really alarmed my political enemies. By this time, the sheriff that I had reported on and largely was responsible for exposing was in federal prison. He was a Republican, and his Tea Party type friends, they wouldn't have been called Tea Party yet, and were angry at me and angry that I might get on city council. So they went to my Billy Graham book. In the back of the book, in the acknowledgments, I knew that I would be, although it's a political biography, I knew people would say I was doing it for religious reasons. So in the back I said, look, I'm not attacking his religion, I'm attacking his politics. I'm exposing, I didn't even say attack, I'm exposing his politics. But for the record, I don't believe in supernatural beings of any stripe. That was the first time I had ever said anything about my beliefs. I mean, I don't really think they're germane. I didn't anyway at that time. I do now. I've become an atheist activist now. Back then I wasn't. I didn't think anybody cared. Well, they used that sentence and they sent a smear letter to thousands, we think at least 10,000 voters, we really don't know how many in the city, that outed me as an atheist and told them that I was going to lead Asheville to hell, that we'd all be eating babies and running around naked and whatever. I don't remember the exact language, but it was strong. And then 2 weeks later, they ran another letter that told the people that, that I had said that Billy Graham was influenced by Adolf Hitler. Consequent to that, I came in third in the general election. I won one of the 3 seats, so I'm on council. But I think the difference in those votes probably could be attributed, at least in part, to those smear letters. A funny story about that is, on election day, my campaign manager was working the polls, and a guy came up to her at his precinct, and he said, "I'm not voting for that Bothwell. He said Billy was influenced by Adolf Hitler." And she said, "Well, have you read his book?" "Nah, I don't need to." She said, "Well, I have read his book, and he did include that in the book." "Yeah." And she said, "Yeah, and was drawn from Billy Graham's autobiography. Who wrote that? Graham did write in his Just As I Am, I think is the title of his autobiography, that he listened to Adolf Hitler in German, not understanding German, that's what I repeated. Listening to the cadences of his speech because he was so good at arousing crowds. He studied him to learn how to work his crusades. And that's all I recorded. Anyway, I got elected. So, now I'm going to be sworn in. Well, these people were not through with me yet. There's a clause still in the North Carolina Constitution, as in South Carolina, as Herb Silverman was fighting, the candidate without a prayer. Thanks for being here. That says you can't hold elective office in North Carolina if you shall deny the being of Almighty God. Now, it's unenforceable. It's never been challenged in court, but it couldn't be enforced because it conflicts with the U.S. Constitution, which has a separation clause. But they challenged it. They went to the DA, who would do nothing. They went to the city attorney, who would do nothing. They went to the Attorney General of North Carolina, who would do nothing. But they made a big stink about it. One guy went to the paper and said he was going to do a citizen's arrest of the rest of the council members if they let me be sworn in. A friend of mine gave me a hardbound copy of The Origin of Species, saying I should be sworn in on that. But I don't regard that as being a proof of honesty either. I mean, that was silly. Oddly, the Constitution also says in North Carolina, you can affirm. You don't have to swear at the bottom. So I affirmed that I would uphold the Constitution, and I was sworn in. All this noise, though, this media noise, in a slow news week, this is the second week of December, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, not much going on, hit the media at just the right time. They were hungry for a weird story. Rachel Maddow called, or her staff called, do you want to be on the show? Duh. I could do that. It turned out they couldn't get a TV truck from their affiliate to where I was for that night's show, so they used still pictures. Diane Sawyer sent a reporter down. The LA Times sent a reporter over. The New York Times ran a story, Chicago Trib, and then it just spread like mad. I was interviewed on Russia Today via Skype, Free Thought Radio, Bill Press, a number of local stations. At one point in the second week of December of 2009, when I Googled my name with the word atheist, it was over 150,000 hits in 8 languages. It was showing up in newspapers and in blogs around the globe. My book started selling like crazy. They made my day. Thanks, They really, literally, turned my life around in terms of being a writer. I mean, I've been a newspaper reporter and editor. That was my 7th book in print, but I'm a minor author. And most writers do not make a living at books. That's the truth. I mean, there's so many, hundreds of new titles per day. You have to have something put you on the charts, and that did it. And I began to get invitations to speak around the country. The American Atheists called me the most courageous elected official. I wasn't ever sure if it was of 2009 or 2010, but I got it in 2010 up in Newark. The American Humanists have had me speak, Minnesota Atheists. I've been here in Denver once before, speaking to the Denver Atheists. I've gone to lots of Unitarian Universalist churches. They read and they buy books. That's so cool. And so they really helped. That it was like throwing me in the briar patch. But at that point, I was then an outed atheist. And it was funny when the reporters first came to me about that. I hadn't really ever self-labeled. I have never been a theist, except for 6 weeks or so after my senior year of high school, I fell in with a bad crowd. Campus Crusade for Christ had a show with a really charismatic young man running it, and there were girls. And it was that summer I was sort of toying with, God again. But then I went to college and it all faded very quickly. But outside of that, God had never been an interesting question to me. So when the reporters first came to me, I told them I was a post-theist, which confused them endlessly. Because truthfully, I was born in 1950, and by the time I was old enough to think, as I grew in my childhood, it was clear to me that all of the old God questions had really been pretty well answered. We understood origins, we understood about where we're headed as universally. I mean, not perfectly, but diseases are no longer caused by spirits, and so forth. And so it really never had, I never was a theist. And so I felt like I'd been born into a post-theist world. And although my parents sent me to Presbyterian Sunday School a few times, it was sort of pro forma. There's good kids there, and also my Boy Scout troop was at that Presbyterian church. So now I was an atheist politician. That really hasn't much affected my life on city council, except for a few nut jobs who once in a while will come for public comment and tell the city and me that the reason we're having such hot weather this summer is because this atheist is on council. But the really cool thing that's happened, and it's the reason, one reason I'm really glad that that all happened to me, and that I'm now an atheist politician, it's the same kind of thing that Herb did, and that others do when they get out in public, is it changes the world. As you heard Dan Barker mention earlier this morning, they're going to file another lawsuit in Memphis concerning prayer in the city council there. Well, about 6 or so years, maybe 8 years before I got on council, our city council had a new minister, a rotation of ministers doing an invocation every week. And the city attorney noted that there were lawsuits elsewhere that cities were having to defend. And he told the council then, you shouldn't be doing this. And so they started rotating, each doing an invocation in turn at each meeting. They were all Christians, and it was all Christian prayer at that time. The year I was elected, 2009, I was there. A Jewish attorney woman was elected, and another, he's a secular humanist, and I think atheist, but he's not out. He's quiet. So he refused to do invocations. I always do secular invocations, quoting Dawkins or whoever, whoever was appropriate for the evening. And this Jewish woman, her father's a professor, and they write amazing poetry together. And it all goes in different directions. It's never a prayer. It's just the thoughts for the evening. A Christian guy who's married to a Presbyterian minister, a woman minister, started quoting Jewish rabbis all the time when he did invocations. And then in the 2011 election, two more Unitarian Universalists were elected. So we now have, I'm a member of our Unitarian Universalist Church in Nashville with an atheist minister. So we now have 3 of us on city council out of 7. I mean, that's pretty amazing in the Bible Belt. And what I've noticed even more, this is even more amazing, there's still a couple of Christians who do Christian prayers, and now they ask if you're willing, bow your head. It's not assumed. And I sit there while I pray and look around, and I keep counting, 15 to 20% of the people were sitting up and looking around. They've been given, they don't have to pretend they're bowing their heads anymore. The culture has changed. And to me, that's maybe the most, I hope I'm doing some great things on energy, on the environment, on our road system. I hope we're going to get better transit. There's a lot of projects I want to work on. But if that's all I've done, I have changed that city council. I've been part of the change of city council. So, okay, now I'm an out atheist in the South. And we have a blue dog Democrat congressman in our district, the 11th Congressional District, named Heath Schuler, a failed football player, who votes with the Republicans on everything important. He voted against the stimulus bill, he voted against the health care bill, he voted against ending the gays, don't ask, don't tell. To my view, he's wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. But last February 22nd of 2011, he voted for the amendment that was introduced that would have redefined rape as only forcible rape in terms of medical care and from the federal government. That was the straw for me. I mean, there have been lots of moments when I didn't like the man, didn't like the way he was voting, didn't like how he was representing us. That day I said to myself, somebody has to primary this guy. I'm seeing hands raised, so I decided to run. And for the next year and a month, we ran a congressional campaign. I would say that in my experience running, the greatest obstacles in terms of religion came from the local newspaper. The local reporter never failed to mention my atheism, even though it was never brought up as an issue between the candidates in the race. He really wanted to make that point. I don't know if he's a devout Christian and angry with me. I don't know if he thought it was stirring the pot and getting more readers, but he did bring that up quite a bit. In the course of meeting with lots of people, and we have a huge, because we're thinly scattered in the mountains, outside the city, it's very thinly populated. The congressional district is about a 6-hour drive from end to end, and about a 3.5-hour drive from top to bottom. I did a lot of driving. I met with a lot of groups, a lot of house parties, a lot of debates. There were very few times that anyone questioned my religion or had any questions about it at all. And when a couple of times that occurred, I said, you know, I'm not running to be your minister. I don't want to tell you what to believe, and I don't think you should tell anybody else what to believe. You know, your religion will be safe with me in office. I believe in religious freedom, but I don't believe in theocracy. And even in places, I spoke to a Tea Party group either. I'd go to anybody who had a forum. After I spoke, a couple of people came to me and said, you know, we don't agree with your politics at all, but you've got guts to show up here, and we really admire you for that. And so being out about your beliefs is okay. You know, you'll be respected, even if they don't agree with you. And this isn't the Deep South. I mean, it may seem strange here in a more enlightened part of the country, and maybe some of you come from even more enlightened parts of the country, but outside of Asheville, in the countryside, there's a lot of very strong evangelical belief. Now, another piece that hurt during my election campaign, which I lost the primary in May, on May 8th of this year, was that I succeeded in getting rid of the congressman. I think we succeeded. I wasn't the only cause, but by January of this year, our polling indicated I was going to beat him in the primary. He had a lot of negatives. Anytime you're an elected official, there are people who are upset with you. And if there's an alternative, there's a likelihood that people will vote for you. And I think we were trending that way anyway. And he suddenly announced he was going to retire. And then he bragged about getting offers from lobbying firms, big dollar. He bragged about how much money he was being offered. I mean, he's such a total sellout. He was not only taking money from the enemy, he's going to go to work for them. To my mind, one of the worst problems we have is our campaign finance system. You know, it's for sale. And he's openly for sale. I think he learned that in the NFL. So his chief of staff jumped into the race. So now there was a fresh face without negatives. You know, he had never cast a vote in Congress. So now I was running against the chief of staff, who took money from the same people and very rapidly outraised us. By the time of the primary, we raised about $90,000. He quickly raised $300,000. He raised it from often insidious sources, in my view. He took them from payday loan companies, which are banned in North Carolina. They did so much damage to soldiers at our forts that our Attorney General crafted a bill and had them banned from the state. Yet he took tens of thousands of dollars from those people, and from lobbying firms in Washington, and from PACs. I mean, he's exactly the problem, in my view. So he had a lot more money, he had no negatives, and then our dear legislature slapped Amendment 1 on the ballot, on the primary ballot. Amendment 1 in our state this year was an anti-gay marriage amendment. It not only banned gay marriage, but depending on how the law ends up being interpreted, it'll ban domestic partner benefits, like our city offers to same-sex couples, one of whom works for our city, and to companies who have benefits for same-sex couples. I mean, it's a really retro piece of legislation, but boy, did it fan the flames in the evangelical churches. You began to see on Sunday mornings, if you were out driving around, people streaming out of their churches with these big blue "Vote Yes on Amendment 1" signs. They really stirred those people up and got them to the polls. And we heard from people inside those churches, that at least in some of them we know, although we don't have recordings, so we can't take them to court. They were not only preaching in favor of the amendment, which is legal. Churches can take a stand on an issue. They were preaching against Cecil Bothwell. They were telling them to go vote that atheist out. And so, in the end, my principal opponent got 51% of the vote. and I got 35% of the vote. The other wild card that showed up was a third candidate who jumped into the race, who agreed with me on almost every single policy position. So we agreed about the wars, we agreed about corporate personhood, we agreed about money and politics, and on, except that he was also an evangelical Christian and was telling every audience he spoke to that I was an atheist and they had to vote against me. So I had 2 Christians running against me, and he got 14% of the vote in the end. So I think we did okay, but I lost. I mean, you know, winning isn't everything, but on the other hand, I learned a lot. We got a message out. I discovered that out in the counties, out in that countryside, there were a lot of progressive thinking people. We weren't alone by any means. And it really didn't much come up in the course of the campaign, questions about religiosity. It was those churches that, and that one candidate that really pushed it. So I would, one thing I got, another sidebar here is the atheist community was terrific in this country because of the notoriety I had gained and the kindness of the American Atheists, of the Friendly Atheist blog. Hemant early on pushed my story. Because of the humanists and all, I got donations from around the country. I got donations from military people who were atheists who were stationed overseas. I got a donation from Japan, from an American there who heard about it, an atheist there who wanted, I mean, so I did take in several $1,000s. I don't remember the breakdown exactly, but the community was very helpful. And that's a way we can all help if another candidate steps forward at any level. Until we make some kind of significant change in campaign finance, we need to find a way to get people, you know, rational people elected. And that's really the main result I'm seeking. We need people who don't believe in fairy tales. We need people who don't believe in supernatural beings. Who don't, you know, we can get there.